My heart stopped when my father's voice thundered through our home on Christmas Eve. No daughter of mine is going to waste her life as a nurse when she could be a surgeon. What he didn't know then was that 3 years later I'd be sitting across from him in a hospital board meeting that would change both our lives forever. Family expectations can build you up or break you down. Mine nearly did both. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the prestigious Blackwell family meant one thing. Excellence was the minimum requirement. My father, Dr. Richard Blackwell, was a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon at Memorial Hospital, where generations of Blackwells had practiced medicine. Our family dinners often resembled medical conferences rather than typical family gatherings. While other kids discussed movies or video games, my siblings and I were expected to debate the latest medical journals. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Michael, who was already completing his surgical residency, and my younger sister Abigail, who had been accepted to medical school at 19. Both of them had inherited our father's steady hands and analytical mind. I, on the other hand, had inherited my mother's empathy and nurturing spirit, qualities my father considered secondary in the medical field. From an early age, I knew I wanted to work in healthcare, but something about surgery never called to me. The emergency room, with its fast pace and human connections, that's where my heart led me. By my senior year of high school, I had made my decision. I would become a nurse practitioner, specializing in emergency medicine. Nursing? My father had scoffed when I first mentioned it at dinner. Blackwells don't become nurses, Sophia. We lead medical teams. We don't support them. The way he said support made it sound like a dirty word, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. My mother squeezed my hand under the table but remained silent. She never contradicted my father in front of us. Despite his disapproval, I pursued my dream. I applied to the best nursing programs in the country and was accepted to the University of Pennsylvania's Accelerated BSN program. When the acceptance letter arrived, I was ecstatic, but terrified to tell my father. That night, I slid the envelope across the table after dinner. "What's this?" he asked, barely looking up from his medical journal. "I've been accepted to Penn's nursing program," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Full scholarship." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face remained unreadable as he scanned the letter. Finally, he set it down and looked at me with disappointment etched into every line of his face. "I could make a call to Johns Hopkins," he said. "Their medical school would take you with your grades. You'd make a fine physician, Sophia." "Dad, I don't want to be a physician. I want to be a nurse practitioner. It's what I'm meant to do." "What you're meant to do?" His voice rose slightly. "What does that even mean? Medicine is our family legacy. Do you understand what you're throwing away?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I insisted. "I'm pursuing medicine, just a different path." He shook his head. "A lesser path." Those 3 words cut deeper than any scalpel could have. But I held my ground. For the next few months, an uneasy truce existed in our home. My father rarely addressed me directly, and when he did, it was with a clipped formality that hurt more than his anger would have. Thanksgiving came and went in a blur of tense conversations and awkward silences. As Christmas approached, I hoped the holiday spirit might soften my father's stance. I had completed my first semester with perfect grades and was eager to share my experiences with my family. Christmas Eve in the Blackwell household had always been an elegant affair. My mother spent days decorating the massive pine tree in our living room with heirloom ornaments and preparing a feast that could rival any 5-star restaurant. This year was no different on the surface. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, and presents were stacked neatly under the tree. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We had just finished dinner when my father cleared his throat. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass, "to Michael, who has been offered a fellowship at Mayo Clinic." My brother smiled modestly, as we all congratulated him, and to Abigail, who has been accepted into the research mentorship program at Harvard. More applause followed. I waited for my father to acknowledge my accomplishments, my 4.0 GPA, or the fact that I'd been selected for a prestigious internship at Pennsylvania Hospital. But he simply sat back in his chair and took a sip of his wine. "What about Sophia?" my mother prompted gently. "She's at the top of her class." My father's expression darkened. "Yes, at the top of her nursing class." "Not quite the same, is it?" The room fell silent. Even Michael, who usually stayed out of family conflicts, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Richard," my mother warned, but he waved her off. "No, Catherine, we've been dancing around this for months. It's time we addressed it." He turned to me, his eyes cold. "Sophia, I've been patient. I thought this nursing nonsense was a phase, that you'd come to your senses, but it's clear you're intent on disappointing this family." "Dad, that's not fair," Michael interjected. "Not fair? What's not fair is watching your sister waste her potential. Do you know how many strings I had to pull to get her an interview at Johns Hopkins?" And she threw it back in my face. "I never asked you to do that," I said quietly. "Of course you didn't. You've never understood what's best for you. That's why parents make decisions for their children." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "I'm 20 years old, Dad. I make my own decisions now." "Not while you live under my roof, you don't." The words hung in the air like a threat. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "My program is fully funded. I don't need your financial support." "This isn't about money, Sophia. This is about legacy, about respecting what this family stands for." "And what exactly does this family stand for, Dad? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like it stands for bullying anyone who doesn't follow your exact path." Gasps echoed around the table. No one spoke to Dr. Richard Blackwell that way, especially not his children. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "How dare you? After everything I've provided for you? You've provided a home and an education, and I'm grateful. But you've never provided acceptance or understanding." My voice was shaking now, but I pressed on. "Why can't you see that I can contribute to medicine in my own way?" "Because nursing isn't medicine," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "It's following orders and changing bedpans. Is that really what you want for yourself? To be at the bottom of the hospital hierarchy?" His words stung, but they also ignited something in me. Years of suppressed frustration came bubbling to the surface. "That shows how little you know about modern nursing. Nurse practitioners diagnose, prescribe, and treat patients. We spend more time with them than doctors ever do. We see them as people, not just interesting cases or statistics." My father stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. "Enough. I will not sit here and listen to you disparage the profession that has put food on this table and clothes on your back." "I'm not disparaging medicine, Dad. I'm defending nursing. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand that." The room fell deadly silent. My mother's eyes were wide with shock. Michael looked impressed despite himself, and Abigail stared down at her plate. My father's voice, when he finally spoke, was eerily calm. "I see. Well, if you're so determined to make your own way, perhaps it's time you did so completely." "What do you mean?" My heart was pounding. "I mean, Sophia, that if you insist on disrespecting this family's traditions and my guidance, then perhaps this is no longer the right home for you." My mother gasped. "Richard, it's Christmas Eve." "I'm well aware of the date, Catherine." His eyes never left mine. "Sophia has made her choice clear. Now she can face the consequences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kicking me out? On Christmas Eve? Because I want to be a nurse instead of a doctor. I'm suggesting that if you're adult enough to make your own career decisions against my advice, you're adult enough to support yourself completely. You have until morning to pack your things." The room spun around me. This couldn't be happening. We'd had disagreements before, but my father had never gone this far. "Richard, please." My mother pleaded, "This is extreme. Let's discuss this after the holidays." "There's nothing to discuss," he replied coldly. "Sophia has made her position clear, as have I." I looked around at my family, my mother's tearful face, Michael's conflicted expression, Abigail's wide eyes. Then I looked back at my father, the man I had spent my entire life trying to please, and realized that nothing I ever did would, as we all congratulated him. And to Abigail, who has been accepted into the research mentorship program at Harvard. More applause followed. I waited for my father to acknowledge my accomplishments, my 4.0 GPA, or the fact that I'd been selected for a prestigious internship at Pennsylvania Hospital. But he simply sat back in his chair and took a sip of his wine. "What about Sophia?" my mother prompted gently. "She's at the top of her class." My father's expression darkened. "Yes, at the top of her nursing class. Not quite the same, is it?" The room fell silent. Even Michael, who usually stayed out of family conflicts, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Richard," my mother warned, but he waved her off. "No, Catherine, we've been dancing around this for months. It's time we addressed it." He turned to me, his eyes cold. "Sophia, I've been patient. I thought this nursing nonsense was a phase, that you'd come to your senses, but it's clear you're intent on disappointing this family." "Dad, that's not fair," Michael interjected. "Not fair? What's not fair is watching your sister waste her potential. Do you know how many strings I had to pull to get her an interview at Johns Hopkins?" And she threw it back in my face. "I never asked you to do that," I said quietly. "Of course you didn't. You've never understood what's best for you. That's why parents make decisions for their children." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "I'm 20 years old, Dad. I make my own decisions now. Not while you live under my roof, you don't." The words hung in the air like a threat. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "My program is fully funded. I don't need your financial support. This isn't about money, Sophia. This is about legacy. About respecting what this family stands for." "And what exactly does this family stand for, Dad? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like it stands for bullying anyone who doesn't follow your exact path." Gasps echoed around the table. No one spoke to Dr. Richard Blackwell that way, especially not his children. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "How dare you? After everything I've provided for you? You've provided a home and an education, and I'm grateful, but you've never provided acceptance or understanding." My voice was shaking now, but I pressed on. "Why can't you see that I can contribute to medicine in my own way?" "Because nursing isn't medicine," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "It's following orders and changing bedpans. Is that really what you want for yourself? To be at the bottom of the hospital hierarchy?" His words stung, but they also ignited something in me. Years of suppressed frustration came bubbling to the surface. "That shows how little you know about modern nursing. Nurse practitioners diagnose, prescribe, and treat patients. We spend more time with them than doctors ever do. We see them as people, not just interesting cases or statistics." My father stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. "Enough. I will not sit here and listen to you disparage the profession that has put food on this table and clothes on your back." "I'm not disparaging medicine, Dad. I'm defending nursing. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand that." The room fell deadly silent. My mother's eyes were wide with shock. Michael looked impressed despite himself. And Abigail stared down at her plate. My father's voice, when he finally spoke, was eerily calm. "I see. Well, if you're so determined to make your own way, perhaps it's time you did so completely." "What do you mean?" My heart was pounding. "I mean, Sophia, that if you insist on disrespecting this family's traditions and my guidance, then perhaps this is no longer the right home for you." My mother gasped. "Richard, it's Christmas Eve." "I'm well aware of the date, Catherine." His eyes never left mine. "Sophia has made her choice clear. Now she can face the consequences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kicking me out? On Christmas Eve? Because I want to be a nurse instead of a doctor?" "I'm suggesting that if you're adult enough to make your own career decisions against my advice, you're adult enough to support yourself completely. You have until morning to pack your things." The room spun around me. This couldn't be happening. We'd had disagreements before, but my father had never gone this far. "Richard, please," my mother pleaded. "This is extreme. Let's discuss this after the holidays." "There's nothing to discuss," he replied coldly. "Sophia has made her position clear, as have I." I looked around at my family, my mother's tearful face, Michael's conflicted expression, Abigail's wide eyes. Then I looked back at my father, the man I had spent my entire life trying to please, and realized that nothing I ever did would be enough unless it aligned perfectly with his vision. Something inside me hardened in that moment. "Fine," I said, standing up. "I'll be gone by morning." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the dining room and up to my bedroom. My hands trembled as I pulled my suitcases from the closet and began to pack. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to break down. Not yet. Not here. A soft knock on my door interrupted my frantic packing. I turned to find Michael standing in the doorway, his expression grave. "He doesn't mean it," he said, stepping into the room. "He's angry, but by morning he'll calm down." I shook my head. "You didn't see his eyes, Michael." He meant every word. My brother sighed and sat on the edge of my bed. "Where will you go?" "I have friends from school who live nearby. I can stay with them until the dorms reopen." I folded a sweater with more care than necessary. "I'll figure it out." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Take this," he said, extending a credit card. "It's my personal account, not Dad's. Use it for whatever you need." I hesitated. "I can't take your money. You're not taking it. I'm offering it. That's what family does, Sophia. Real family." He placed the card on my nightstand. "And for what it's worth, I think you'll make an incredible nurse practitioner. Anyone would be lucky to have you caring for them." His words brought fresh tears to my eyes. I hugged him tightly, grateful for this small act of solidarity. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, my mother slipped into my room. Her eyes were red from crying, and she carried a small box in her hands. "I was going to give you this tomorrow," she said, sitting beside me on the bed, "but I think you should have it now." I opened the box to find a beautiful stethoscope, engraved with my name. "Mom, your father doesn't speak for all of us," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "I'm proud of you, Sophia. I've always been proud of you." "Then why didn't you ever stand up to him?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. She looked away, shame crossing her features. "That's my failure, not yours. I've spent so many years keeping the peace that I forgot how to fight." She looked back at me, something like admiration in her eyes. "But you haven't. You're braver than I ever was." We sat in silence for a moment, both aware that something fundamental had changed in our family dynamic. "Will you be okay?" I finally asked. A sad smile crossed her face. "I should be asking you that." "I'll be fine, Mom. This isn't how I imagined starting my independent life, but maybe it's what I need." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Call me tomorrow? Let me know where you are?" "I will," I promised. When she left, I finished packing, carefully placing the stethoscope in my carry-on bag. Then I sat at my desk and wrote 2 letters. One to my father, expressing both my hurt and my determination to succeed on my own terms, and one to Abigail, encouraging her to follow her own path, whatever that might be. As the first light of Christmas morning filtered through my curtains, I took one last look at the bedroom that had been mine for 20 years. The walls were covered with photographs and mementos, academic awards, swim team trophies, pictures with friends. A life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. I carried my bags downstairs as quietly as possible, not wanting a dramatic goodbye. But as I reached the front door, I found my father standing there, still in his robe, looking older than I had ever seen him. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might ask me to stay. Instead, he simply stepped aside to let me pass. "Dad," I said, pausing at the threshold. "I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't about rejecting our family legacy. It's about building on it in my own way." His expression remained impassive. "When you realize your mistake, Sophia, you know where to find me." Those were the last words my father spoke to me for nearly 3 years. I spent that Christmas with my college roommate's family, who welcomed me with a warmth that made my own family's coldness all the more stark. By New Year's, I had found a small apartment near campus and a part-time job at a local cafe to supplement my scholarship. The following months were the hardest of my life. Beyond the practical challenges of suddenly being completely independent, I struggled with the emotional fallout of my father's rejection. Some days, anger kept me going, determination, to prove him wrong about nursing and about me. Other days, grief overwhelmed me, mourning the relationship we had once had and might never recover. My mother called regularly, though always when my father was at the hospital. She sent care packages and occasionally met me for lunch in the city. Michael visited when his residency schedule allowed, and even Abigail snuck away to see me once, full of questions about what it was like to defy our father. But my father maintained his silence. He didn't call on my birthday. He didn't acknowledge my graduation from the BSN program, where I graduated summa cum laude. He didn't respond to the occasional letters I sent, updating him on my academic progress and my growing certainty that I had chosen the right path. I threw myself into my studies, and then into my work. After completing my accelerated BSN, I was accepted into the nurse practitioner program at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in emergency medicine. I excelled in my clinical rotations, earning praise from physicians and nurses alike for my clinical judgment and patient rapport. By the time I completed my NP program, I had multiple job offers. I accepted a position at Philadelphia General Hospital, known for its Level 1 trauma center and innovative approach to emergency medicine. Within a year, I had established myself as a valued member of the emergency department, respected by the medical team and beloved by patients. I had built a life for myself, a good life, filled with meaningful work and supportive friends, but the wound of my father's rejection never fully healed. On quiet nights, I would sometimes find myself staring at my phone, wondering what would happen if I called him. Pride always stopped me. He had cast me out. It was up to him to welcome me back. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working a typical shift in the ER when my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Dad had a heart attack. Memorial Hospital. It's serious." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Despite everything, he was still my father. I immediately requested emergency family leave and drove through the night to reach Memorial Hospital, the very institution where my father had built his career and our family legacy. When I arrived at the cardiac care unit, I found my mother sitting alone in the waiting room, looking small and fragile. "Mom," I called, rushing to her side. "How is he?" She embraced me tightly. "He's stable for now. Triple bypass surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Of course I came," I said. "Whatever happened between us, he's still my father." We sat together as she filled me in on the details. My father had collapsed during a surgical consultation. The heart attack was severe, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, often called the widowmaker. If it hadn't happened in a hospital surrounded by medical professionals, he likely wouldn't have survived. "Is Michael performing the surgery?" I asked. My brother had followed in our father's footsteps, becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon. "No, he's too close to the case. Dr. Reynolds will be operating." She hesitated. "Your father doesn't know you're here." I wasn't sure how he would react. I nodded, understanding her caution. "Can I see him?" She led me to his room, warning me that he was heavily medicated and might not be fully aware. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my father, the formidable Dr. Richard Blackwell, looking diminished against the white hospital sheets, connected to monitors and IV lines. I approached his bedside cautiously. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. I had seen countless patients in similar conditions, but this was different. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had quizzed me on anatomy at the dinner table, who had once been the center of my world. "Dad?" I said softly, not sure if I wanted him to hear me or not. His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze before recognition dawned. "Sophia?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, it's me. I came as soon as I heard." He stared at me for a long moment, and I braced myself for rejection. Instead, he reached for my hand, his grip weak but determined. "You're here," he said, as if confirming a fact he couldn't quite believe. "I'm here," I repeated, squeezing his hand gently. No other words were exchanged. He drifted back to sleep, still holding my hand, and I sat with him until a nurse came to administer his evening medications. In the hallway outside his room, I ran into Michael, still in his surgical scrubs. "You made it?" he said, embracing me. "How bad is it really?" I asked, knowing he would give me the unvarnished truth. He sighed. "It's serious, Sophia. The damage to his heart is extensive. Dr. Reynolds is excellent, but—" He trailed off, and I understood what he wasn't saying. My father's prognosis was uncertain at best. "I'm staying," I said firmly. "For as long as needed." Michael nodded, relief evident in his tired eyes. "There's something else you should know. There's a board meeting tomorrow afternoon to discuss the future of the cardiothoracic department. Dad was supposed to present his 5-year plan. And now? Now they're expecting me to step in. But I don't know the details of his vision. No one does." I frowned. "Can't they postpone? The hospital's new corporate owners are flying in specifically for this. Postponing isn't an option." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father that it made my heart ache. The timing couldn't be worse. As we stood there, discussing options, a nurse approached us. "Dr. Blackwell? Your father is asking for Sophia." Michael and I exchanged surprised glances before I hurried back to my father's room. He was more alert now, sitting up slightly against his pillows. "Sophia," he said as I entered, "we need to talk." I approached my father's hospital bed with a mixture of trepidation and hope. After 3 years of silence, what could he possibly want to say now, when he was at his most vulnerable? His face looked drawn, the confident surgeon replaced by a frail patient facing his own mortality. "Sit," he said, gesturing weakly to the chair beside his bed. His voice, though quieter than I remembered, still carried that authoritative tone that had defined my childhood. I sat, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who's just had a heart attack," he replied dryly, a ghost of his old sardonic humor. Then his expression turned serious. "Michael tells me the board meeting can't be postponed. Of all the things I had imagined he might want to discuss, our estrangement, my career, an apology perhaps, this was unexpected." That's what he said. My father nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "The 5-year plan for the cardiothoracic department is in my office. Bottom drawer of my desk, blue binder. The corporate representatives need to see it." "I can get it to Michael," I offered, confused about why he was telling me this. "No," he shook his head. "Michael doesn't understand the politics at play. The new corporate owners want to restructure the department, cut costs, reduce specialized staff, standardize protocols. My plan counters their proposals with evidence-based alternatives that preserve quality care." "Dad, I don't understand what this has to do with me." He took a labored breath. "You need to present it." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Me? I'm not even affiliated with this hospital. I haven't spoken to you in 3 years. I'm a nurse practitioner, not a surgeon." "Precisely." For the first time he looked away. "The corporate team values diverse perspectives. They've been pushing for more interdisciplinary approaches." Understanding dawned. "So you want to use me? After kicking me out of your life, now I'm suddenly useful because I represent nursing rather than surgery?" His jaw tightened, that familiar expression of frustration I'd seen countless times growing up. "This isn't about us, Sophia. It's about the future of patient care at Memorial. What I'm proposing will maintain surgical excellence while integrating advanced nursing protocols. Your background makes you uniquely qualified to represent this vision." I stood up, anger bubbling to the surface. "Uniquely qualified? 3 years ago, you told me nursing wasn't real medicine. You threw me out of your house because I chose this path. And now you want me to leverage my nursing credentials to help you? Not to help me," he said sharply. "To help the patients who will suffer if corporate healthcare further erodes specialized care." He paused. wincing slightly as he shifted position. And yes, I see the irony. I crossed my arms, studying him. Why not have Mom or Abigail get the binder to Michael? Why involve me in the presentation at all? Something flickered across his face. Was it shame? Regret? It was gone before I could identify it. Because you're good at this. Better than Michael at communicating complex ideas to non-medical audiences. Better than I ever was. The compliment, so unexpected after years of criticism, momentarily stunned me into silence. Tomorrow morning I'll be in surgery while the board meets, he continued. Someone needs to make them understand what's at stake. Michael has the surgical knowledge, but not the presentation skills. You have both. I paced the small room, trying to process what he was asking. After everything that had happened, my first instinct was to refuse. Let him face the consequences of his actions for once. But something made me hesitate. Perhaps the memory of my mother's words the night I left. Your father doesn't speak for all of us. This wasn't just about him. It was about the hospital where generations of my family had worked. About the patients who would be affected by corporate decisions. About the legacy that, despite everything, was still part of my identity. If I do this, I said finally, I do it my way. I present the medical data you've prepared, but I also speak to the nursing perspective, the impact these changes would have on patient care beyond the operating room. He nodded slowly. I wouldn't expect anything less. And afterward we talk, really talk. About Christmas Eve, about the last 3 years, about everything. His expression hardened momentarily, that familiar resistance to emotional vulnerability. Then, perhaps remembering where he was and what he was facing, he relented. Agreed. We spent the next hour reviewing the key points of his 5-year plan. Despite our estrangement, we fell into a familiar rhythm of medical discussion, the shared language of healthcare bridging some of the distance between us. He was still arrogant, still convinced of his own correctness, but there was something different too, a willingness to acknowledge the value of my perspective that had never been there before. When the nurse came to inform us that visiting hours were ending, I stood to leave. Sophia, my father called as I reached the door. I turned back. Thank you for coming. And not just for this. He gestured to the notes I'd taken on his plan. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and left before the tears threatening at the corners of my eyes could fall. In the hospital corridor, I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of the whirlwind day. 12 hours ago, I had been treating patients in Philadelphia, my father a painful memory I tried not to dwell on. Now I was preparing to represent him at a crucial board meeting while he underwent life-threatening surgery. Sophia? My mother appeared beside me, concern etched on her face. Are you all right? What did he want? I explained the situation as we walked to the hospital cafeteria. Her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and finally a knowing look that I couldn't quite interpret. So you'll do it? She asked as we sat with cups of mediocre coffee. I haven't decided yet, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should walk away, just like he did to me. My mother sighed, wrapping her hands around her cup. Your father is a proud man, Sophia. Too proud for his own good sometimes. Asking for your help, that couldn't have been easy for him. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't, she agreed. Nothing excuses that. But people can change, especially when faced with their own mortality. She reached across the table to take my hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just as I should have done 3 years ago. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her presence. I need some time to think. After leaving my mother, I found myself wandering the hospital corridors, eventually ending up outside the emergency department. The familiar sounds and smells brought me back to my own workplace, reminding me why I had chosen this path despite the cost. I watched the coordinated dance of doctors, nurses, and technicians, each playing their vital role in patient care. This was what my father had never understood. Medicine wasn't a hierarchy with surgeons at the top, but a web of interconnected expertise, all essential. As I stood there, a voice called my name. I turned to see Dr. Eleanor Chen, the ER director who had been my mentor during a clinical rotation years ago. "Sophia Blackwell, what brings you back to Memorial?" She embraced me warmly. "Family emergency," I explained. "My father had a heart attack." Her expression softened. "I heard about Dr. Blackwell. I'm so sorry." She hesitated. "I know things were complicated between you two." I smiled ruefully. Hospital gossip was as efficient as any electronic medical record. They still are. But complicated just got more complicated. We found a quiet corner in the staff lounge, and I told her about my father's request and my conflicted feelings. "It sounds like he's offering an olive branch," Dr. Chen observed when I finished, in his own emotionally stunted way. I laughed despite myself. That's one way to put it. "The question is, what do you want, Sophia? Forget about your father for a moment. What outcome would bring you peace?" I considered her question carefully. I want to know that I did the right thing, regardless of how he treated me. And I want him to acknowledge that my path in medicine is just as valuable as the one he chose for me. She nodded thoughtfully. "Then I think you have your answer." That night, I stayed at my childhood home for the first time in 3 years. My old bedroom remained exactly as I had left it, a time capsule of the life I had lived before my father's ultimatum. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the photographs and mementos that had once defined me, feeling like a visitor in my own past. I called my supervisor in Philadelphia to explain my extended absence, then spent several hours reviewing my father's 5-year plan. It was brilliant, I had to admit, clinically sound and financially viable, with patient outcomes prioritized throughout. But it was also distinctly surgeon-centric, with nursing considerations relegated to brief mentions rather than fully integrated components. By morning, I had made my decision and had begun adapting the presentation to reflect a more comprehensive approach to patient care. As dawn broke, I drove to the hospital, stopping at my father's office to retrieve the blue binder he had mentioned. His office was a reflection of the man himself, meticulously organized, academically impressive, and completely impersonal. No family photos adorned his desk. No mementos from patients brightened the sterile space. I found the binder exactly where he said it would be, along with additional research that supported his proposals. As I prepared to leave, my eyes fell on a small object partially hidden behind a stack of medical journals. A framed photograph of me at my high school graduation, beaming as I held my diploma. I picked it up, surprised to find this personal item in his otherwise clinical workspace. Before I could process what this might mean, my phone rang. It was Michael, calling to let me know our father was being prepped for surgery. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," I promised, slipping the binder into my bag and leaving the office with one last glance at the photograph. The surgical floor was quiet when I arrived, most procedures not yet underway at this early hour. I found my mother and Abigail in the surgical waiting area, both looking as though they hadn't slept. "He's already gone in," my mother informed me, her voice tight with worry. "Dr. Reynolds said it would be at least 6 hours." I nodded, setting my bag down and embracing each of them. "The board meeting is at 11. I'll be back as soon as it's over." "You're doing it then?" Abigail asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Yes," I confirmed, "but I'm doing it my way." I spent the next few hours in an unused conference room, finalizing my presentation and incorporating additional nursing research to support the integrated care model I believed would strengthen my father's original plan. At 10:30, I changed into the professional outfit my mother had brought from home and made my way to the administrative floor. The boardroom was imposing, all dark wood and leather chairs, with portraits of past hospital directors lining the walls. My grandfather's stern face looked down from one of them, a reminder of the legacy I was both part of and apart from. Board members and corporate representatives filed in, most regarding me with curiosity or confusion. I recognized some from my childhood. Physicians who had been my father's colleagues, administrators who had attended our family events. None seemed particularly pleased to see me as their presenter. At precisely 11, the hospital's CEO, Dr. Maxwell, called the meeting to order. "As you all know, Dr. Richard Blackwell is currently in surgery. His son, Dr. Michael Blackwell, was expected to present the cardiothoracic department's 5-year plan in his stead. but has been called to assist with a complication in another case. He glanced at me. Instead, we have Ms. Blackwell, nurse practitioner Blackwell. I corrected firmly. I'm currently with the emergency department at Philadelphia General Hospital. Murmurs rippled through the room. I caught fragments. Richard's daughter. The one who left. Just a nurse. Dr. Maxwell cleared his throat. Yes, well. I understand you'll be presenting Dr. Blackwell's plan. I stood, distributing copies of the presentation materials. I'll be presenting an enhanced version of my father's plan, integrating advanced nursing protocols with his surgical excellence framework. More murmurs, less polite this time. A corporate representative, his badge identified him as Victor Harrington, CFO, spoke up. We were expecting to hear the official departmental plan as approved by Dr. Blackwell, not an interpretation. I met his gaze steadily. Mr. Harrington, what you're about to hear maintains all the core elements of my father's vision, while expanding its scope to address interdisciplinary care models that improve patient outcomes and reduce readmission rates. Given that your own corporate materials emphasize innovative approaches to integrated care, I believed you would appreciate this more comprehensive perspective. His eyes narrowed, but he sat back, gesturing for me to continue. For the next 45 minutes, I presented the enhanced plan, navigating between my father's surgical protocols and my own nursing insights. I cited research supporting integrated care teams, demonstrated cost savings through reduced complications and length of stay, and outlined specific implementation strategies that respected both surgical autonomy and nursing expertise. As I concluded, the room remained silent. I had expected immediate opposition, particularly from the old guard who had worked alongside my father for decades. Instead, I faced thoughtful expressions and considering glances. Dr. Maxwell broke the silence. This is not what we anticipated, nurse practitioner Blackwell, but it is compelling. Victor Harrington leaned forward. The financial projections show greater savings than Dr. Blackwell's original plan, yet you're proposing to maintain the same staffing levels. How is that possible? By reducing complications through enhanced pre- and post-operative care, I explained. The average cardiac surgery complication costs this hospital approximately $45,000 per incident. Reduce your complication rate by even 5% through better integrated care, and the savings more than offset the staffing costs. The discussion that followed was vigorous but respectful. Board members raised concerns. Corporate representatives questioned assumptions. And I defended the plan with data and real-world examples from my own practice. Throughout, I felt a growing confidence, not just in the plan itself, but in my right to be there presenting it. As the meeting neared its conclusion, the boardroom door opened. All heads turned to see my brother Michael standing in the doorway, still in his surgical scrubs. Michael, Dr. Maxwell acknowledged. We were just finishing up. Your sister has given quite a remarkable presentation. Michael's eyes found mine, a silent question in them. I gave a small nod, hoping he would understand that I had represented our father's interests while staying true to my own convictions. How is he? I asked, the professional veneer slipping as concern for my father took precedence. Stable, Michael replied. The surgery was successful, but there were complications. He's in recovery now. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by renewed anxiety. The surgery might be over, but recovery from both the physical trauma and our personal conflict had only just begun. The board members began to disperse, many stopping to shake my hand or comment on specific aspects of the presentation. Victor Harrington, the corporate CFO who had initially questioned my authority, approached last. Nurse practitioner Blackwell, he said, extending his hand. That was unexpected, but impressive. We'll need to review the details further, of course, but your integrated approach aligns well with our corporate vision, perhaps better than your father's original plan. I accepted his handshake, careful to keep my expression neutral. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I look forward to hearing your feedback. As he walked away, Michael joined me at the front of the room. What exactly did you present? He asked quietly. Dad's plan, plus nursing protocols that complement his surgical approach. I explained. I didn't undermine him if that's what you're worried about. He shook his head. That's not. Sophia, do you have any idea what just happened here? The corporate team has been looking for any excuse to overhaul the department completely. Dad's plan was our last chance to maintain clinical autonomy. A slow smile spread across his face. And you just gave them exactly what they needed to hear, in a language they understand. Is that a good thing? It's an incredible thing. You may have just saved the department. He hesitated, then added, Dad would be proud. I gathered my materials, unsure how to respond to that. I need to see him. We walked together to the recovery unit, where our mother and Abigail were already keeping vigil. My father lay unconscious, connected to monitors and breathing apparatus that made him look smaller than I had ever seen him. The surgeon says it went as well as could be expected. My mother informed us, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. They had to place additional stents, but they're optimistic about his recovery. I took the seat beside her, reaching for her hand. That's good news. Abigail, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Did you really present at the board meeting? As a nurse? I nodded, too emotionally drained to correct her terminology. Yes. And they listened to you? The surprise in her voice reflected the family dynamic we had all lived with. The assumption that only a physician's voice carried weight in healthcare decisions. They did. I confirmed. Because what I had to say was valuable, regardless of my title. As we sat there, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of my father's chest, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I had left this hospital and this family, determined to forge my own path in medicine. Now I had returned, not as the daughter seeking approval, but as a healthcare professional in my own right, confident in my expertise and its value. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken my father's medical crisis and the threat to his department to create space for my voice to be heard. But perhaps that was how change often happened, not through gradual evolution, but through moments of crisis that forced new perspectives. Hours passed as we maintained our vigil. Michael was called away for another surgical consult, and Abigail left briefly to get food for everyone. My mother dozed in her chair, exhaustion finally claiming her. I was alone with my unconscious father when his eyes first fluttered open. Disoriented, and likely in pain, he looked around the room before his gaze settled on me. Sophia? His voice was barely audible through the oxygen mask. I'm here, Dad, I said, moving closer to his bedside. The surgery went well. You're going to be okay. He nodded slightly, then whispered, The meeting? Even now, his first thought was of the hospital and his department. Some things never changed. It went fine, I assured him. We can talk about it later. He shook his head weakly, determination in his eyes, despite his condition. Tell me. I sighed, recognizing the familiar stubbornness. I presented an enhanced version of your plan. Integrated care model, nursing protocols alongside surgical excellence. The board was receptive. Even the corporate team seemed impressed. He processed this information slowly, his medication-dulled mind working to understand the implications. You changed my plan? I improved it, I corrected gently. Added nursing perspectives that strengthen your surgical framework. Better patient outcomes, lower readmission rates. Cost savings without sacrificing quality care. A long silence followed, during which I braced myself for anger or disappointment. Instead, he simply asked, They accepted it? Initial response was positive. They're reviewing the details. He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he had drifted back to sleep. Then he murmured, Always were stubborn, just like me. Before I could respond, a nurse entered to check his vital signs, and my mother stirred from her nap. The moment for private conversation had passed, but something had shifted between us. A small acknowledgement, perhaps, that my stubbornness might not be the liability he had always considered it. As the evening progressed, my father drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, his eyes sought me out, as if to confirm I was still there. Each time I reassured him with a nod or a word. This simple communication bridging some of the vast distance between us. Later that night, as I sat alone with him while my mother went home to rest, he reached for my hand. His grip was weak but intentional. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. I considered deflecting with a light answer but decided he deserved honesty. "Because despite everything, you're my father. And because some part of me hoped that nearly dying might make you reconsider some things." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tactical. I learned from the best," I replied, surprised to find myself smiling back. He regarded me thoughtfully, more lucid now as the anesthesia continued to wear off. "The board meeting. You could have undermined me, presented something completely different. That wasn't why I was there. Why were you there then?" I met his gaze steadily. "To preserve what matters. Quality patient care, while showing that there's more than one way to achieve it." He nodded slowly, wincing slightly at the movement. "Your way and my way." "Both valuable," I said. "Both necessary." A long silence stretched between us, filled with the beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital at night. Finally, he spoke again, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him. "I was wrong," he said. 3 years ago. Christmas Eve." He took a labored breath. "I was wrong about many things." The words I had waited 3 years to hear, delivered in a hospital room after a near-death experience. Not the dramatic apology I had sometimes imagined, but perhaps something more genuine for its simplicity. "Yes," I agreed softly. "You were." His eyes held mine, something like respect in them now. "But today, at the board meeting, you were right. In the Blackwell family, this was as close to absolution as one could hope for. Not forgiveness asked or granted, but acknowledgement of worth, professional respect that might, with time, evolve into personal reconciliation." I squeezed his hand gently. "Get some rest, Dad. We can talk more tomorrow." As he drifted off to sleep, still holding my hand, I felt a complicated peace settle over me. The road ahead would not be easy. 3 years of estrangement and a lifetime of misunderstanding could not be erased by one crisis or one conversation. But perhaps they had created an opening, a chance to build something new from the ruins of what had been broken. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, more negotiations of both professional boundaries and personal relationships. For tonight, it was enough to sit in this quiet room, feeling the steady pulse in my father's wrist beneath my fingers, and know that we had both, in our own ways, begun to heal. Morning arrived with the soft beeping of hospital monitors and the hushed voices of the medical team during rounds. I had fallen asleep in the chair beside my father's bed, my neck stiff, and my thoughts jumbled. The events of the previous day felt almost dreamlike. The board meeting, my father's surgery, his whispered acknowledgement of being wrong. A gentle hand on my shoulder stirred me fully awake. Dr. Reynolds, the cardiothoracic surgeon who had performed my father's bypass, stood beside me with a tablet displaying post-operative scans. "Nurse practitioner Blackwell." He greeted me, his voice low to avoid waking my father. "Your brother mentioned you'd want to review these." I straightened, instantly alert. "How is he doing?" "Remarkably well considering the extent of the damage. The grafts are all patent, and his cardiac function is better than I expected at this stage." He passed me the tablet, respecting my professional standing enough to share the clinical details directly. "We'll need to watch for post-operative complications, of course, but I'm cautiously optimistic." I studied the images carefully, noting the surgical repairs and the improved blood flow to previously compromised areas of my father's heart. "When do you anticipate transferring him out of the ICU?" "If he continues at this pace, possibly tomorrow, but he'll need extensive cardiac rehabilitation afterward. The recovery process will be significant." As we discussed the details of my father's care plan, I was struck by the surreal nature of the situation. 3 years ago, I had left this hospital feeling like an outsider in my own family's world. Now I was being consulted as a healthcare professional about my father's condition, my expertise acknowledged without question. Dr. Reynolds departed, and I found myself alone with my father again. He looked more peaceful this morning, his color improved and his breathing steadier. As I watched him sleep, I considered the path that had brought us both to this moment. His stubbornness and my rebellion, his crisis and my return. Studying the enemy? My father's voice, though weak, carried its familiar dry humor. His eyes were open, watching me, watching him. "Just checking that you're still breathing," I replied, matching his tone. "Someone has to make sure you stay alive long enough to admit I was right about a few more things." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Seems I've created a monster. A competent, articulate monster who impresses hospital boards." I sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to disturb any of the tubes or wires connecting him to the various monitors. "Dr. Reynolds says you're doing well, better than expected." Always was an overachiever. He shifted slightly, wincing with the movement. "The board meeting. Tell me everything." Despite his condition, his mind was clearly sharp, focused on the hospital, politics that had defined much of his career. I provided a detailed account of the presentation and the board's response, including Victor Harrington's surprising endorsement of the integrated care model. "Harrington is a shark," my father commented when I finished. "If he likes something, it's because he sees profit in it." "Or value," I countered. "The evidence supporting integrated care models is overwhelming. Better outcomes, lower readmission rates, higher patient satisfaction. Even a shark can recognize good medicine when he sees it." My father studied me with new eyes, as if truly seeing me for the first time. "You've grown. Formidable." Coming from Richard Blackwell, this was high praise indeed. Before I could respond, a nurse entered to administer medications and check vital signs, ending our moment of connection. The rest of the day passed in a blur of medical consultations, family visits, and brief conversations with my father between his periods of rest. Michael arrived with news that the board had officially requested a detailed implementation plan for the integrated care model, effectively accepting the core of our proposal. "They want you involved in developing it," he told me as we shared a quick lunch in the hospital cafeteria. "Harrington specifically asked if you'd be available for consultation." I nearly choked on my sandwich. "Me? I don't even work here." "Maybe that's about to change." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Memorial could use someone with your perspective, especially now that the corporate overlords have taken an interest in nursing-led initiatives." The thought of returning to Memorial, of working alongside my family in the institution that had rejected my chosen path, was both intriguing and unsettling. "I have a job in Philadelphia. A good one." "I know," Michael acknowledged. "Just keep an open mind. Things are changing around here, Sophia. Maybe faster than any of us expected." When I returned to my father's room, I found him engaged in an intense conversation with Victor Harrington himself. They fell silent as I entered, both turning to look at me with expressions that suggested I had been the topic of discussion. "Nurse practitioner Blackwell," Harrington greeted me, extending his hand. "I was just telling your father how impressed the board was with your presentation yesterday." I shook his hand, noting my father's watchful gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I'm glad it was well received." "More than well received. We'd like to fast-track the implementation of several components, particularly the interdisciplinary care teams and the enhanced recovery protocols." He glanced at my father. With Dr. Blackwell's approval, of course. My father's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Harrington believes these initiatives could become a model for our other hospitals in the network. He's proposing a new position to oversee the implementation." The implication hung in the air between us. Harrington smiled, all corporate charm and calculated warmth. "We'd be very interested in discussing your potential involvement, nurse practitioner Blackwell. Your unique perspective, combined with your family's legacy at Memorial, makes you an ideal candidate." Before I could formulate a response, my father surprised me. "Sophia would need full autonomy and appropriate authority, not a token position or a corporate mouthpiece." Harrington nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my father's advocacy. "Of course. We're envisioning a director-level position, reporting directly to the chief medical officer, with a dedicated budget and team." I looked between them, wondering when exactly my father had become my career negotiator. This is unexpected. I'd need time to consider it. Of course, Harrington agreed smoothly. Take all the time you need. We understand you have commitments in Philadelphia. He handed me his business card. When you're ready to discuss details, call me directly. After he left, an awkward silence filled the room. My father was the first to break it. You don't have to take it. I know, I replied, turning the business card over in my hands. But it's a remarkable opportunity. It's also politically complicated. Harrington is using you to push his agenda. I couldn't help but laugh. And you've never used anyone to push yours? To my surprise, my father chuckled, then winced as the movement pulled at his surgical incision. Touché? His expression turned serious. But I meant what I said. If you consider this, it needs to be on your terms. Director-level minimum, with real authority. I studied him, trying to reconcile this supportive stance with the man who had thrown me out for choosing nursing over medicine. Why are you advocating for me now? He looked away, focusing on the window where afternoon light streamed into the sterile room. Perhaps nearly dying provides a certain perspective. That's not an answer. My father sighed, meeting my gaze with unusual vulnerability. Because I was wrong, Sophia. Not just about Christmas Eve, but about many things. I watched you in that board meeting. Michael showed me the recording this morning. You were extraordinary. Not despite being a nurse practitioner, but because of it. His words hung in the air between us, the closest thing to an apology and validation I had ever received from him. Before I could respond, he continued, I built my career on surgical excellence, on the belief that what happens in the operating room defines patient outcomes. But watching you articulate how nursing care and interdisciplinary approaches enhance those outcomes, it was humbling. Dad, he held up a hand, stopping me. Let me finish. I'm still medicated enough that I might actually say what needs to be said. He took a labored breath. I pushed you away because you chose a different path than the one I had envisioned for you. I told myself it was about family legacy and tradition, but really, it was about control and pride. My pride. I sat beside him, tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. It hurt, being cast out like that. I know, he acknowledged quietly, and I can't undo that hurt. But I can acknowledge that your path has value, enormous value, and that I was wrong to dismiss it. In the Blackwell family, this was as close to an emotional reckoning as we had ever come. No dramatic embraces or tearful reconciliations, just the quiet acknowledgement of truth that had been too long denied. So what now? I asked finally. Now, my father said with a ghost of his old commanding tone. You consider Harrington's offer carefully, and whatever you decide, you negotiate from strength, not gratitude. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my mother and Abigail, bringing fresh clothes and homemade food that my father wasn't yet allowed to eat. As they settled in, I excused myself, needing space to process everything that had happened. I found myself in the hospital's courtyard garden, a small oasis of green, amid the clinical environment. Sitting on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, I called my supervisor in Philadelphia to update her on my father's condition and my extended absence. Take all the time you need, she assured me. Family comes first. Then, hesitantly, is there anything else going on, Sophia? You sound different. I found myself explaining the board meeting, Harrington's job offer, and the unexpected shift in my father's attitude. As I spoke, the reality of the situation began to crystallize in my mind. It sounds like an incredible opportunity, my supervisor observed when I finished, but it also sounds complicated given your history there. That's putting it mildly, I agreed. 3 years ago, my father kicked me out for choosing nursing over medicine. Now he's advocating for me to have a director-level position that would put nursing protocols on equal footing with surgical ones. People can change, Sophia. Sometimes it takes a crisis to provide clarity. Or a business opportunity, I countered, thinking of Harrington's calculating smile. The corporate team sees profit potential in the integrated care model. That's what's driving this, not some grand reconciliation. Maybe, she conceded. But that doesn't mean you can't use it to affect real change. If they're willing to invest in nursing-led initiatives, does their motivation really matter? Her question stayed with me as I returned to my father's room, where a physical therapist was helping him sit up at the edge of the bed for the first time since surgery. The mighty Dr. Richard Blackwell, who had commanded operating rooms and hospital boards with equal authority, now needed assistance to simply sit upright. He looked up as I entered, his face pale with exertion but his eyes alert. Perfect timing. I need a witness to this indignity. I smiled, recognizing his attempt at humor as a shield against vulnerability. I'll try not to take too many mental pictures for future leverage. The physical therapist guided him through several breathing exercises before helping him lie back down. "You're doing well, Dr. Blackwell," she encouraged. "Tomorrow we'll try standing." After she left, my father closed his eyes, clearly exhausted by the brief activity. I thought he had fallen asleep until he spoke again. When I was on that table, knowing they were about to stop my heart and trust a machine to keep me alive, I had a moment of perfect clarity. I sat beside him, listening. I realized that all the authority I'd accumulated, all the professional respect and achievements meant nothing in that moment. What mattered were the relationships I'd cultivated or failed to cultivate. He opened his eyes, looking directly at me. "I thought about you, Sophia, about Christmas Eve, about all the things I should have said instead of what I did say." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted, "because if there's one thing a cardiac surgeon understands, it's that you might not get a second chance." He reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I'm sorry, Sophia, for Christmas Eve. For every time I made you feel that your path was less valuable than the one I wanted for you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The words I had longed to hear for 3 years, delivered with a sincerity I had never expected from my proud, unyielding father. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I squeezed his hand in return. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to manage more. We sat in silence for a moment, this new understanding settling between us. Finally, I gathered myself and stood. "You should rest. I'll come back this evening." "The job offer," he said as I reached the door. "Whatever you decide, I hope you know that I'm proud of you. Not because of any position or title, but because of who you've become, despite my best efforts to shape you into something else." Those words followed me through the hospital corridors, through conversations with Michael about our father's recovery plan, through a quick dinner with my mother and Abigail at a nearby restaurant. By the time I returned to the hospital that evening, I had made my decision. I found my father awake and more alert than he had been earlier, sitting up with the assistance of his bed controls and reviewing medical documents despite the nurses' admonitions to rest. "Some things never change," I observed from the doorway. He looked up, a hint of his old sharpness returning to his gaze. "If you expect me to lie here like an invalid, you've confused me with a more compliant patient." I entered, noting with professional satisfaction the improved color in his face and the stronger quality of his voice. "The nurses have my sympathy. You must be their favorite patient." "I'm efficient," he countered. "They appreciate that." I sat beside him, taking in the familiar stubbornness that had shaped so much of my childhood. I'd been thinking about Harrington's offer. My father set aside his documents, giving me his full attention. "And? I'm going to pursue it, but with conditions. I want to develop a true integrated care model, not just a cost-cutting measure disguised as innovation. That means nursing autonomy within collaborative teams, evidence-based protocols that respect both medical and nursing expertise, and patient outcomes as the primary metric of success." He nodded slowly. "Harrington won't like all of that, especially the part about metrics beyond financial ones. Then I'll make it a condition of my acceptance. This isn't about prestige or title for me. It's about creating a model that genuinely improves patient care." I met his gaze directly, and about proving that nursing expertise is essential to that improvement, not auxiliary to it. A smile, a real one, not the sardonic expression I was accustomed to, spread across my father's face. "Now you sound like a Blackwell." "I've always been a Blackwell," I reminded him, "just not the kind you expected." He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. Perhaps the kind we needed instead. The next few days brought rapid developments both in my father's recovery and in my negotiations with the hospital administration. My father was transferred out of the ICU to a step-down unit, where he progressed from sitting to standing to taking short walks down the corridor, leaning on a walker but insisting he didn't need it. Meanwhile, I met with Victor Harrington and the hospital's chief medical officer to discuss the proposed director position. True to my word, I advocated for a model that prioritized patient outcomes over mere cost savings, integrated nursing expertise as an equal component rather than a subordinate one, and established clear metrics for success beyond financial benchmarks. This is more ambitious than what we initially envisioned, Harrington admitted during our second meeting. The implementation timeline alone would need to be extended. Quality improvement isn't a sprint. I countered. If you want sustainable results that can be replicated across your hospital network, you need to invest in getting it right the first time. To my surprise, the chief medical officer, Drive, Elaine Morris, a respected neurologist who had known my father for decades, backed my position. Nurse practitioner Blackwell is right. The evidence supports this more comprehensive approach, even if the initial investment is higher. By the end of the week, we had reached an agreement in principle. I would join Memorial Hospital as Director of Integrated Care Innovation, with authority to develop and implement the model across departments, starting with cardiothoracic services. The position would report directly to Dr. Morris, with a dedicated budget and team. When I shared the news with my father, now recovering in a private room filled with flowers and cards from colleagues and former patients, his response surprised me. "You're sure this is what you want?" he asked, studying me carefully. "Not just proving a point to me or the institution that rejected your path." The question gave me pause. Was I seeking validation from the very people who had dismissed my choices? Or was I genuinely pursuing an opportunity to effect meaningful change? Both, I admitted finally. I want to prove that nursing leadership can transform patient care. But I also want to be part of this hospital's future, to build on the legacy you and generations of Blackwells created here, just in my own way. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Motivation matters, Sophia. The best work comes from a place of both personal conviction and broader purpose. Coming from my father, this was profound validation, acknowledgement that my motivations were not just acceptable, but admirable. As my father's discharge date approached, our family dynamic continued its tentative transformation. My mother, emboldened perhaps by my father's vulnerability, began to express opinions she had long kept to herself, including her belief that the Blackwell home needed significant updating. "While you're recovering, we should renovate the kitchen," she announced one morning. "It's 30 years outdated, and I've always hated those cabinets." My father, who normally resisted any change to his carefully ordered environment, merely raised an eyebrow. "Whatever you think best, Catherine." Abigail and I exchanged shocked glances. Near-death experiences, it seemed, could work miracles. The day before my father's discharge, I found myself alone with him during evening visiting hours. Michael was in surgery, my mother was preparing the house for his return, and Abigail had reluctantly returned to her medical school rotations. "I've been thinking," my father said as we shared the dinner my mother had brought earlier, his first real meal since the surgery, "about Christmas Eve 3 years ago." I tensed slightly, the memory still painful despite our recent reconciliation. "What about it?" "I've been trying to understand why I reacted so strongly to your choice." He set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't just about family tradition or professional hierarchy, though those played a part." "What was it about then?" He considered the question carefully. "Fear, I think. Fear that if you chose a different path, it might mean my path wasn't the only right one. That perhaps I had missed something in my single-minded pursuit of surgical excellence." His honesty stunned me. "And now? Now I know that I did miss things. Important things about patient care, about the value of different perspectives in medicine." He smiled ruefully. "It took a heart attack and watching my daughter impress a hospital board to make me see it, but I got there eventually." "Better late than never," I offered, returning his smile. "Indeed." He reached across the table to take my hand. "When I return to work, and I will return, whatever the cardiologists say about retirement, I hope we might collaborate on some aspects of this integrated care model of yours." I may have a few insights to contribute. The offer represented everything I had once hoped for from my father: professional respect, acknowledgement of my expertise, and a desire for genuine collaboration. "I'd like that," I said, squeezing his hand. 2 weeks later, as my father began his cardiac rehabilitation program, and I prepared to officially start my new position at Memorial, we shared a quiet moment on the patio of the Blackwell family home. The autumn air was crisp, golden leaves drifting from the maple trees that had witnessed generations of our family's triumphs and struggles. "I never told you," my father said, breaking a comfortable silence, "why I became a surgeon." I looked at him curiously. The story of his career choice was family legend, following in his father's footsteps, maintaining the Blackwell legacy of surgical excellence. I thought it was because of grandfather. He shook his head. "That's what I allowed everyone to believe. The truth is more complicated." He gazed out at the garden, his expression distant. "When I was 16, my best friend nearly died in a car accident. I watched the trauma surgeons work on him for hours, their hands moving with such precision and purpose. They saved his life when everyone else had given up hope. I listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a part of my father's history I had never known. In that moment, I knew what I wanted to do with my life," he continued. "Not because it was expected of me, but because I had seen firsthand the difference it could make." He turned to me. "I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. The genuine calling that drew me to medicine. I started seeing the prestige and the position as the point, rather than the privilege of helping people at their most vulnerable." "And now?" I prompted gently. "Now I'm reminded of why I began this journey. And I'm grateful that you never lost sight of your own calling, even when I tried to redirect it." He reached for my hand. "You were right to stand your ground, Sophia. Right to walk out that Christmas Eve." "I didn't want to walk out," I admitted. "I wanted you to understand." "I understand now," he said simply. "Better late than never, as you said." As we sat together, the past receding and a new future taking shape before us, I realized that sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most meaningful destinations. My journey from that painful Christmas Eve to this moment of reconciliation had transformed not just my relationship with my father, but my understanding of my own strength and purpose. The Blackwell legacy would continue, not as a rigid tradition passed unchanged through generations, but as a living commitment to healing that could take many forms: surgeon's scalpel or nurse practitioner's holistic care, operating room or emergency department, traditional approaches or innovative models. In standing firm against my father's rejection, I had not only preserved my own authentic path, but ultimately helped him rediscover the true heart of his. And in that unexpected outcome lay perhaps the most important lesson of all: that courage and conviction, even when they seem to create conflict, can ultimately lead to deeper understanding and connection. "We have work to do," my father said, his eyes bright with renewed purpose. "Both of us." Yes, I agreed, feeling the weight of both challenge and opportunity in those words. "We do." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.